Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day two of our Global Talent Conference. This morning, we'll be launching our report, and before that, our esteemed and beloved chairman, Sir Trevor Phillips, will be talking a little bit about our ideas on asymmetry, particularly in regards to the voluntary and public sectors. Over to you, Sir Trevor.
Good morning, Raj. Um, I apologize for jumping on the call a little earlier than I thought. So enthusiastic. Morning, everybody. I'm just going to take a few minutes to try and set our scene before we talk to you about a piece of work that we are rather proud of, that we've been working on for some months, and which we released yesterday, which we hope will introduce some new thoughts to you and also some new questions for us to address and possibly open out some new approaches. It's been a year since we've had this conversation at the previous GTC, and many of the things that were true a year ago are still true today. That we live in an unstable world, war, there are economic changes, um, changes in geopolitics, and there are some new things. The impact of economic tariffs by the United States, plus, if you like, some new domestic issues. We have a new government, new questions about who lives here, who does not live here, how we manage our economy, and so on. But for all of us who work in the talent area, the human capital area, there are still some certainties. There is a tight labor market, and some of that is to do with contemporary issues, economic issues, but much of it is to do with long-term changes, an aging society, changes in the economy, the fact that there are more vacancies than available qualified individuals, and that's to do with the change in the structure of our economy, more services and so forth, and perhaps some questions about our education system, whether we're producing people with the right kinds of qualifications for the future. There is the continuing world movement of people, the IOM, the UN body, um, tells us that there are more people living and working outside the country of their birth than ever before in human history. That number has now topped 300 million. There are increasingly or continuingly raised expectations of behavior in the corporate world, particularly from our younger employees. And I think many of us are seeing, if you like, a generational divide in the attitude to work, both in terms of expectations of employers, but also in the willingness of younger employees to move on. Of course, that's also a function of the tight labor market. Opportunities exist if you have the talent. And finally, I think that something I spoke about last year, which is the greater transparency of employers and their behaviors and so on to employees, I think is making a huge difference to the relationship between workforce and bosses. That is to say, in the old days, you could say, if you were unkind, that staff put up with things because they didn't know any better. That's not true any longer because of social media, because of comparison websites and so on. So there are continuing certainties of change in the labor market, which challenge all of us. Of course, in the last 12 months, there has been a further challenge, particularly in the area of diversity and inclusion. And I don't really want to get into, if you like, the political arguments about backlash and so on, though we know that that's had an impact on sentiment toward diversity and inclusion, increasingly, particularly American firms or American-owned firms are cautious about their interventions in this area. What I think is true, though, is that for those of us who have been on that track for many, many years, there have been great changes, many of them positive, uh, changes in legislation, changes in practice. We now have routine pay gap reporting for in relation to sex and gender, and I think we will soon have, as default, something similar in relation to ethnicity and possibly disability. Not because these are just interesting measures, but because they are health checks in each organization uh, that tell us to what extent are we treating different kinds of people fairly, and to what extent are we taking advantage of the capabilities and talent of all our people. But I think the challenge to DEI has not been all negative. Um, we at Green Park, uh, I guess we are quite a restless firm. We are always looking to do better. And that sometimes means that you have to be rethinking what you believe. Um, I have started life as a scientist and engineer, and one of the things about scientists and engineers is that they live in a world of doubt. In politics, people tend to say, my theories have bumped up against the evidence that you're presenting. Go out and get me some new evidence. Whereas a scientist tends to say, my theories have bumped up against the evidence. I need to go and get myself a new theory. And I think we at Green Park tend towards the latter. And we're beginning to think again about the way that we understand diversity and inclusion, not in the sense of trying to restate or revise our ambitions. Our ambitions are still exactly the same as they were, that every person should be given the opportunity to realize their potential. Every organization should be doing its utmost to take the best of all of its people. But understanding how to get to those objectives will change in relation with the evidence that you have to hand. And it will change because of uh, new challenges. The specific challenge, of course, that everybody is talking about right now is AI. One of the uh, pieces of evidence that we already have, and some of this is anecdotal, but I don't think anybody's going to challenge what I'm about to say. We know that artificial intelligence, the usage of large language models, and so on, will have a huge impact on the way that we all work. Right now, that impact, I think, is limited, but most people believe that it will, in time, be extraordinary, huge. It's probably the simplest way to put it. But we don't necessarily know in what way. But we're beginning to see some possibilities. And the one that we are particularly concerned about, uh, because I think of our history and experience in relation to diversity, is that the impact of change will not be the same for everyone. We think that the challenges in AI will be different depending on whether you're a man or a woman, whether you come from a minority or not. To give you a couple of simple examples of the way that we think things might work, which in a way are to do with old technologies rather than new technologies. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I was working in a retailer, one of the things that um, what we anticipated was that there would be fewer cashiers. Well, of course, fewer cashiers, if you're in an organization of 80,000 or 200,000 or 300,000 employees, is not going to be the same for all of those 80 or 200 or 300,000 employees because women are more likely to be or the cashiers are more likely to be women by quite a distance than men, the impact of the reduction of point of sale uh, personnel uh, will, of course, be fall more heavily on women than it will on men. Coming down the road, literally, of course, we will see the driverless uh, driverless vehicle. And it is almost certain that because that particular area of most organizations, logistics, is heavily male, that the impact of the driverless vehicle will probably be greater on the male part of the workforce than it will on the female. Of course, we don't quite know exactly what it will be because we expect that that won't mean that there won't be anybody in a vehicle, but they will do something different. And it's quite conceivable. There's a world in which um, there are fewer men in those vehicles, but more women in those vehicles because some of the tasks are ones which are traditionally uh, done by women. So we don't know, but what we do know is that change will not affect everybody in the same way. The asymmetry of change, of course, also presents new opportunities. One of the things that we discovered at Green Park with our clients was that post-COVID, something new had become possible. The increase in working from home meant that some of our clients who had previously said to us, we're keen on greater diversity, particularly greater ethnic diversity, but it's quite difficult. We are located, for example, in the northeast of England or the southwest of England. And looking at the population profile in our travel to work area, it's hard to see how we would get more people from ethnic minorities to work for us. Well, one big employer with, I think, about 16 or 17 sites in the southwest and indeed, and in fact, the northwest, uh, with whom we had that conversation, post-COVID, embarked on an experiment with our advice on uh, changing work patterns in such a way that it meant that certain jobs which they had thought you had to be on location for pretty much all the time no longer needed that level of presenteeism. And as a consequence, they were able uh, to recruit people from a much wider geographical range. You could work in Cumbria, but still live in Leicester and not have to move your family. So all of these changes, we think, are presenting some new challenges and new opportunities. That doesn't mean that there are no divisions in the workplace. We know that there will still be differential impact of policy on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of gender, now increasingly on the basis of age and geography. There is also another new factor that we're beginning to think about, and that is the way in which automation and potentially AI will change how different kinds of work are valued. My own simple example of this is, of course, plumbers and professors. Um, I've been at work for a very long time, and in my working life, plumbers were always thought of as sort of um, honest artisans who got paid pretty much around the average, but had no particular social status. Professors, of course, would probably get paid a bit more, not huge amount, but a bit more, but they would have great social status because there were few of them and they had, if you like, secret knowledge. We're now in an age where, for example, to take an extreme example, we can look forward to surgery being done better by robots than by humans because the robots have steadier hands. Their actions are exactly replicable. They will do the same stitch 1,000 times in exactly the same way to the same quality. They're not affected by anxiety or illness or external factors. And of course, they can draw on technology, knowledge of technology from all over the world instantaneously. AI is now beginning to hold out a prospect of some white collar occupations, which historically have been high status and highly paid, becoming rather routine, whereas some manual occupations are going to become specialist and professionals. You ask that question, you can ask this question in a different way. Who are going to be the priests of the future? Who will hold the secret knowledge in the world of work? Will it be continued to be the professors, or might it be the electricians, the mechanics, the builders? I think we only need to ask ourselves these days, who knows what's gone wrong with your car uh, if they open the bonnet? Who will sort out your plumbing or the oven when it goes wrong? It's not going to be the professor of of uh, of Egyptology. And of course, there are completely new roles like influencers who have millions of followers and carry great weight in our society. The last point I want to make about the change in thinking about talent over the last year is that the emergence of social mobility as an issue. Now, to some extent, this might be, of course, because social mobility is a little easier to talk about than race or sex and gender or even disability. But there is no question that since the financial crisis of 2008, a generational divide has emerged between those, for example, who can build wealth through owning homes and other assets, and those who cannot. And we'll see what happens in the budget next month. But clearly, one of the things that the Chancellor is having to think about is what is important in our society to support pensions or to find money for support of students. We are, of course, going to see some of the outgrowth of that in every workplace. What really matters, those who provide and develop our wealth creating possibilities now because they've got 20 or 30 years of experience and capability, or do we plunge resources into those who will be the wealth creators of tomorrow? Not an easy trade-off, but one that we do need to think about. And of course, it will be present some new challenges for those who are in the people business, because social mobility isn't exactly like protected characteristics. To put it simply, I can change my accent, I can't change my color. Um, the question for many of us is, how do we as employers, how do we as handlers of talent make sure that social background is not a barrier to the recognition and the development of great talent? Um, so it is now 9:20, so we should move on. But I just wanted to start this session this morning by putting before you some of the issues that we're beginning to think that we're thinking about at Green Park, which are presented in the human talent space, which are difficult, but which demand the kind of conversation that I hope that you'll be having today at this Global Talent Conference. With that, I want to just hand back to Raj to for him to start our conversation about some of the new work that we've been doing, and particularly in this case, as one element of, if you like, the asymmetry in a workforce, the work that we've been doing on what we call the race inclusion gap. Raj.
Thank you, Trevor. Good morning, everybody. I believe time is the most valuable thing we have, so thank you for investing your time with us here. I appreciate everyone has choices, and I'm hoping that in the next 10 minutes or so, we'll be able to inform and perhaps influence some of your choices in the future. I'm Raj Tulsiani, Chief Executive of Green Park and co-founder of Race Equality Matters. My day-to-day role is pretty simple. In our group, it's to make sure we keep our promises, and personally, it's to work with some of our strategic clients to untie knotty solutions as a solutions architect working on knotty problems. This morning it's much simpler. It's to share some of the findings of our new race inclusion gap report and perhaps to gently challenge us all to consider how doing things better might add value to our organisation's ability to deliver on their own promises and commitments. Because the gap in this report is illustrated not only as an inclusion issue, but as an enterprise-wide business risk, and hopefully will increasingly be treated as such. We start with some reality. 5 years ago, corporate Britain promised change. Millions were spent on D&I in what can be really referred to as a D&I gold rush. Awareness was raised, staff expectations rocketed, and representation improved at board level. As we've seen since then from our leadership index and analysis of large companies since 2014, that representation has often been temporary, driven down by retention issues and increasingly analog thinking about search and nomination processes in a market where people are thinking much more digitally. Across organizations, this survey shows that employees, especially minority employees, don't feel the same. There's evidence of progress in day-to-day working lives, but they don't feel the same way as their leaders do. In fact, as we'll demonstrate, the gap between leaders' self-perception and the employee experience is vast. So here's a few of the key headlines. On culture, 98% of leaders believe they role model inclusion, but only 44% of ethnic minority employees agree. On confidence, every leader said that they're comfortable talking about race, but only 37% of minority staff agreed. On racism, 100% of leaders believe they show zero tolerance, but only 53% of minority employees agree. On career opportunity, 78% of leaders think progression is fair. Only 34% of minority employees believe them. On belonging, 92% of white staff feel they belong. Just 66% of minority colleagues feel the same way. If you add this to our insights from over 500 independent audits and impact assessments on cultural change programs, the story is the same. Progress is experienced as far less than our leaders imagine, and often doing the right things are not creating the value as intended. At the moment, this isn't a gap, it's a canyon. And it's costing organizations talent, productivity, discretionary spend, and increasingly reputation. When employees feel unheard, stereotyped or excluded, typically three things happen. Firstly, they may disengage, dragging down team performance. Secondly, they may leave. Or thirdly, and what tends to happen the most, they stay, but they underperform. All of that means rising attrition costs, weakened opportunity to innovate, and leadership teams that are distracted by firefighting instead of leading. The race inclusion gap isn't a D&I challenge, it's a business risk. And the risks don't stop there. What this report also alludes to is the danger of asymmetry, when different groups in the workforce experience the same organisation in fundamentally different ways. Leaders tell us they're confident, inclusive and fair. White employees broadly agree, but too many minority employees describe a completely different workplace. That asymmetry erodes and trust is at risk. This polarizes teams, and creates cultures where division rather than cohesion can become the norm. In an environment already marked by political polarization, leaders cannot afford their own workplaces to become another battleground. Because when people start aligning around identities instead of shared organizational goals, productivity falls, attrition spikes, and the organization risks becoming paralyzed by mistrust. Asymmetry is not a soft issue, it's an increasing indicator of organizational fragility. And unless leaders tackle it head on, it will undermine their ability to compete for talent, for discretionary spend, and for the attention that we all require from our marketplaces. By 2050, more than half of the UK workforce will be foreign born or the children of immigrants. Race and culture won't be side issues, they'll be central to ongoing competitiveness. Whilst parts of the US dismantles DEI, demographics means Britain cannot afford to follow. In our economy, inclusion isn't an ideology, it's organizational survival. But here's the good news. Organizations that get this will get an edge. Organizational leadership cultures can be developed and changed quickly to engage and retain more talent, to make better decisions supporting your service users and customers, and to grow more sustainably. I'd like people to think about inclusion not as a moral gesture, but as a cost-effective business advantage. In fact, it's still the cheapest way to increase productivity in UK organisations. At Green Park, we exist to help organisations close these kinds of gaps. For nearly 20 years, we've been a challenger brand in leadership advisory, executive search, and diversity, culture, and ethics consulting. We help leaders understand and eliminate barriers, redesign systems, and embed the type of inclusion they need to deliver their promises into their culture. So there's a clear choice for leaders. The race inclusion gap is sobering, but it's also a real opportunity, a chance to stop confusing effort with impact. Some data and a chance to use that data to rebuild trust, and a chance to lead in ways that bring a more inclusive future into focus, and a future that will reward that and not punish that is on its way to us. So at Green Park, we tend to say everyone deserves a decent boss, and although talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And in the future, a decent boss doesn't just hit numbers. They understand the role of belonging, and they're real enough to understand you cannot keep all the people happy all of the time. Some turn equality from aspiration into lived experience and then to brand loyalty. But they all understand that equality isn't just about who gets into the room, but who gets listened to once they're there. It's a clear choice: fall behind or partner to close the gap. Thank you. Back over to you, Trevor.
Well, thank you, Raj. That was terrific, if I may say so. And it's not often a chair gets to say that about his CEO. Normally, we're just moaning.
Yes, I'm acutely aware of that, but thank you for the positive feedback. I appreciate it.
No, I think that two really important to point out. I'd like to leave this session with. One is that why all of this matters. This issue of asymmetry matters. Is first of all, as someone who spends a lot of his life in the communications business, one of the things that you are probably the first and most important thing that you are aware of is that what you say is not always what is heard. And as Raj has outlined there from our research, what is clear is what even the best intentioned leaders want to say isn't being heard in the same way by all of the people in their organizations. And as Raj said, different groups experience the workplace very differently. I think that most of us, most of the time, haven't, uh, in the leadership cadre, haven't quite understood that properly. But we need to understand it because it is true now, and it is for the reasons that I gave in my earlier remarks, going to become more and more true. And the second thing is that this genuinely has an impact. The continuing problem for this country, the United Kingdom, is a very, very straightforward one: productivity. Uh, our people don't produce as much per hour as obviously those in the United States or Canada, even less even than in the EU. And that is completely connected to their levels of engagement, their levels of commitment, their levels of support for their leadership. And as our survey shows, that is not uniform across the workforce. And our problem is that the growing part of the workforce is the part that is less committed and less productive. Uh, that is our responsibility, both to our shareholders, but also, I guess, to our country. Um, we'll probably, forgive me, I'm slightly lost on where we go from here, but I think we are due to take a break now for
Yeah,
five
just a
minutes,
short break,
and
two or
then
three
we'll be
minute break
back
before
in
we
the room
move
in
over.
5 minutes. Thank you very much, everybody.